tutorials based on Classroom in a Book by Adobe, for Adobe Illustrator CS2. We're going to begin with lesson 00 and a few comments on Illustrator versus Photoshop. Right off the bat, you'll notice on the main toolbar that the tools here are different. Illustrator is a vector drawing program. Photoshop is a raster program. So Photoshop is based on changing colors of pixels. Illustrator is based on equations and areas. You'll never see a staircase effect because you run out of real resolution in Illustrator, but you're also going to have a much more difficult time making a realistic picture because when you fill an area with a color, it becomes a solid color and it doesn't have the shading and reflections and other things that are inherent in a Photoshop picture. Just a couple of things to keep in mind. The tour done looks like this picture over here, and that's what we're going to be heading to or heading with as we take a quick look at some of the things that Illustrator can do, beginning on page 14. So that's the finished product. I'm just going to minimize it for right now, and we're going to start a new file. Right off the top, it asks us how big it wants to be, and it doesn't specify a resolution because it's not required. It will redraw as needed. I am just going to call this one lesson sample. The other thing you'll notice is that there's an area outside of your page as a workspace. In Photoshop, you don't really get to use that. In Illustrator, you can actually set a drawing object or a thing outside of the drawing area so that you can bring it in later on. It can be kind of handy. So we've got our new blank document, and it asks us to go to View and Show Rulers, so we can do that. And then we are going to start bringing in some objects. This area in here is a drawing object creation area. You've got a line, you've got pen tools, you've got your text tool, and you've got your shapes tool. And the same as Photoshop, if there's a little black triangle on the bottom right corner, the menu expands. Last item used is always on the top. So it wants us to use a rectangle tool. It says click once on the artboard, and it wants us to enter values of 600 point and 50 point. Notice how those values immediately get changed to inches. Window transform. Shows up in the bottom corner here, which is fine. Using the selection tool, which is sitting up on the top here, top left selection tool as opposed to direct select tool, which is over on the right. We'll see that one later on. Click and drag the rectangle to the upper part of the page. And I think I'm going to hit Control minus for a sec so that you can actually see the page. Or we can click up in here on the top here in the options sub bar. This gives you a reference point on the triangle, and then you can see what the coordinates for that object are. And we probably should have set this thing up in points. So let's see if we can go to our document setup, and we can change our units to points. And it might make it a little easier for us to work in here. It wants our Y coordinate to be reading 6. Sorry, X coordinate to be reading 6, and our Y coordinate to be reading 675. And I better type that one in because that will be faster. So there we go. And now it actually asks us to save it as hopping, and I'm going to leave it as sits. That finishes the first section, and now we're sitting on page 15 where it says setting up on the blend. We can click on this rectangle. We already have it picked. Hold down the Alt key on the keyboard, and you'll notice that your cursor has changed as in step 1. And we click cut. We should have a copy, and we should be able to drag that copy down if you like. If we had held shift, it probably would have stayed in the same vertical plane. 275 for that one. I lost the original. Let's do that. So this one needs to be in 675, and this one needed to be in 6. So there we have 2 rectangles sitting there. My swatches palette is visible. Clicked on the top. We want to have the fill forward, I believe. And we want to fill our rectangle with Starry Night Blue. And the bottom one, Pure Cyan. There it is. We are going to do select all. We could have also control clicked them. Bring stroke to the front. And click no stroke. Could have also done that up in here. No stroke. There's a blend tool sitting right here. Click the blend tool. Click the top. Click the bottom. And you could say you could have done this with the gradient tool, and to a certain extent you are correct. That would have also set up a gradient or a blend of colors from one end to the other. That brings us to page 18. We are going to be placing a Photoshop image in here. So I'm going to go select, deselect. So I have nothing selected. Could also have clicked beside. I'm going to go File, Place. And the Lesson 00 folder is found on the Student Resources U Drive Lesson 0. And we want to place the shoescolor.psd and click Place. And we want the preview box to be on. And we want the green sneakers to be up. And we're going to click OK. And we're going to go select, deselect. And I'm going to pause here for a minute. And it asks us on the top of page 19 to repeat that step a couple more times. File, Place, to bring in the purple and the red shoes. So we've got the red shoes, and File, or Select, Deselect, File, Place. So we've got green, we've got red, we want purple. Okay. And that should have all those shoes sitting on top of each other. I believe the reason why it allows us to do that is because those shoes would have been colored that way in the Photoshop file in the layers. All right, next step. We're going to align them with each other. And we are going to, I just moved those things so they weren't stacked on top of each other so we could actually see them. We're going to select the green and drag it to the top. We're going to bring the purple to the middle-ish. This one to the bottom. Select the green one, hold down the shift key, purple and red. Window, align palette. It's kind of a handy one to remember. We are going to horizontal left align button, vertical distribute, center. And I'm actually going to take them and bump them down just a touch with the arrow key because I like that better. And then I am going to leave things alone for right now. I could save. Next step, deselect, click off the image. I'm going to go back in File Place. And this time we're going to pick Dancing, PSD, and click Place. Move it over onto the right side of the square. So, next step, as far as what we're going to do, window, control palette is open. You better see which one that one is. If you can't remember, you can always click it. There's an opacity here. There's a drop down arrow beside it. Tracing options. Preview box turned on. I'm just going to slide it over to the side a little bit so you can see what's going on. And it says to leave things at default as black and white image. And there's a threshold box here. You can move the slider back and forth. You can see what's going on there a little bit. Try and get it back to where it was. That looks all right. And we are going to click the trace button. Still selected. We're going to click the expand button. And basically what that does is it takes the gradients, the lines, the areas that it recognizes in a raster image, and it approximates them with areas and equations. And then when you hit the expand button, it breaks the areas apart from each other so that you can work with them. So I'm going to move over to the direct select tool, and I'm going to go select deselect. Click on the white background. Select same color. Delete on the keyboard. Removes all the white. Keeps the traced black lines intact. Next step. Type tool. Oh, by the way, you might have noticed we haven't used a new layer yet. We don't really need to work with or worry about layers in the same way as Photoshop because all the objects in this thing are contained separately, so they don't sit over top of each other, erase each other, cover each other up in the same way that the raster images in Photoshop did. So something to also keep in mind at this program. You work with multiple layers more for convenience. So we've got the type tool happening, and we're going to click someplace, and I'm going to type in hopping, and I'm going to pick the text, and we want the text size to go up to 85 points, which I'll probably have to type in and hit enter. If you click and drag over the font name in the font field, and we can use the up and down to navigate through the fonts. We're looking for Chaparral, which is C, which is going to be pretty far up on the list, I would think. Or you could also hit the drop down and see if you can find it in there. I'm looking for Chaparral Pro, or you can type Chap in there to get that. So you could try that too. And it'll bring it up for you. And when you have what you want, you can hit enter. And we want bold. And then we're going to go over to the selection tool. Transform palette is still open, but now we're seeing a line, so we're going to go transform. We want 200 in the X. We want 675 in the Y. Text area is still selected. Type create outlines. So instead of having text now, you have vector shapes. And I think at this point you couldn't spell check it anymore. We still have this text group together. So we're going to have to ungroup it because apparently we want to play with a set of letters individually. So we're going to go to Object, Ungroup, and we're going to go Select and Save Selection. And we're going to call it Hoppin'. And I think I'll leave out the quote. And File, Save. The appearance panel is open here on the right side. It shows the stroke, which is the outline of the object. It shows the fill, which is in the interior of the object. Our selection is still happening, so we don't need to worry about that. And it's listed as a compound path. The swatches is open. And we want to click on the stroke and set it as white. We want to take the fill and set it as red. Our selection is still available. So we have the stroke in the appearance path. We're going to go to Effect and Path and Offset Path. We want 2 points. It's nice to preview. And we'll leave the other things alone. Click OK. And now we're going to go to the fill part. Notice that there's an offset path now in there. So we're going to have to scroll down in our list. And the offset path works on the stroke. We're going to go to the fill and the appearance. We're going to click on opacity in the control up in the top in the control palette. We're going to change the blending mode to hue. And we're going to leave it at that. And we're still selected. So now we're going to go to Window. I'm going to go to Graphic Styles. Page 228, Step 3. We are looking for new offset, new graphic style from the palette menu. So we should be able to go up in the top here and go New Graphic Style. We're going to give it an offset stroke. Click OK. And that gives us a style that we can use to apply to a different type later on. Select, deselect, using the type tool. Choose. Transform palette. 200 for an X. 625 for a Y. Click on. Select the text and click on the offset stroke. And file save. Another way of moving images in, file open. We are going to move in the target. Open it. Control A to select everything in this object. Control C to copy. Closing the target file. Control V to paste. Select, save selection. Page 29. Step 6. Call it target. Hit enter. Object. Live paint. Make this a path group. Choose the live paint bucket. And you can see that as you work over this thing, certain areas between the paths give you an area that you can paint in. We want red from the swatches. And we are going to work our way from the outside ring, the middle ring, and the center. That finishes step 9. Over to page 30. I choose the none swatches. and fill the gray ones. And that basically uh, takes the color out of those without actually deleting the pass on the edges of them. And Control S to save. Transparency window is in with the stroke gradient. Using the selection tool, select the target. Transparency instead of normal, we want overlay. And using the selection tool, we're going to move it so that the looks like the foot of the person is clicking the target. And apparently our image is getting close to being done. I think I should like this person here, this path, to come over to the right a little bit so that his head isn't buried underneath the shoes. And that would also mean that I need to move the target over a little bit. So I'm just going to hold shift and put with the arrow key. It's another way of moving stuff around nicely. Use the arrow keys to move things or shift to move them a little quicker. We are going to select the rounded rectangle tool this time. It's underneath the rectangle tool. We're going to click once on the artboard. We want a width of 585. We want the height of 400. Corner radius is set at 12, which is fine. Click OK. Selection tool. You can see that my artwork is a little hard time covering my artwork all with the same with this thing, so might have to push my individual up a little bit. Let's see if we can push them up just a tiny bit. And again, we'll adjust the arrow or adjust the target. Let's see if we can bring in this thing and cover it all up as it asks us to do. That looks pretty good. So we've covered our art using that rectangle as in step number 4 on page 31. Object, lock, nope. Object, unlock all. Doesn't look like there's much we can do. Oh, the blend. Object, nope, that apparently isn't locked either. Must have missed a step in there. Select all. Object clipping mask, make. Object clipping mask, make. And because the rectangle is on the top, it should cut through all the other objects, basically, and outline them in a way, or determine the shape. And there you have it. There is the end of lesson 00. I hope that you noticed there's a little bit of a difference between working with Illustrator and with Photoshop. We never once had to zoom into a picture to change pixels. And basically, all the objects that we've been playing with are vector objects or paths. If you really want to see what the difference is, if I can zoom into the corner here of this guy here, perhaps, you can see these little points on there. I can actually, should be able to, select, deselect, grab a corner and actually change the actual shape of this object by adjusting the vector shapes on the curves, and you can see that it's obviously not photoshopped then. Anyways, you don't need to do that last little part. I just wanted to quickly show you that. There's a direct select tool and the select tool picks the whole object, and the direct select tool allows you to pick anchors, paths, and corners on an object and actually work with the components of a shape. I look forward to seeing you back in our next lesson. Have a great day.